Imagine that you are standing at the edge of a small village somewhere in ancient Gaul around 2,000 years ago. The morning sun has only recently risen above the hills. Farmers are already working in nearby fields. Smoke rises from cooking fires. Children run between wooden homes. To most people, it seems like an ordinary day. Then a rider arrives. His horse is exhausted. Dust covers his clothing. He barely slows down before shouting the news. The Romans are coming. Almost immediately, the atmosphere changes. Conversations stop. Farmers abandon their work. Villagers gather together, asking questions that nobody can answer. How far away are they? How many soldiers are coming? Are they simply passing through? Or is this village their destination? No one knows, but everyone understands one thing. Rome is coming. For much of the ancient world, those words carried a meaning that is difficult for modern people to fully appreciate. The Roman Empire became one of the largest and most powerful civilizations in human history. At its height, it controlled vast territories stretching across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Millions of people lived under Roman rule. Hundreds of cities were connected through Roman roads. Entire cultures were influenced by Roman laws, customs, and military power. Yet Rome did not build its empire through diplomacy alone. Behind every border stood the Roman army. And for many enemies, the Roman army was something to fear. What made Rome different from so many other civilizations of the ancient world was not simply the number of soldiers it could field. Other kingdoms had large armies. Other rulers commanded thousands of warriors. The true strength of Rome came from something much less dramatic: organization, discipline, patience. The Roman army often appeared unstoppable because it approached warfare differently than many of its enemies. While some armies relied on individual bravery, Rome relied on systems. While some warriors sought personal glory, Roman soldiers focused on cooperation. While some kingdoms assembled armies only when war arrived, Rome maintained professional forces that trained constantly. The result was an army that often seemed almost machine-like to those who faced it. Imagine once again that you are a villager hearing reports of a Roman army approaching. At first, you might expect to see something similar to the warriors you already know. Perhaps a collection of tribesmen carrying shields and spears. Perhaps a force gathered quickly from nearby settlements. Instead, what appears on the horizon is something entirely different. First comes the dust. Thousands of feet moving along roads create enormous clouds visible from great distances. Then come the sounds, the steady rhythm of marching boots, the clinking of armor, the movement of equipment and wagons. Long before the soldiers themselves become visible, people often know they are approaching. And then, eventually, they appear. Rows upon rows of soldiers move together with remarkable precision. Each man carries similar equipment. Each follows the same pace. Each understands his position within the larger formation. To modern eyes, it might resemble a military parade. To many ancient observers, it looked almost unnatural. Human beings are not supposed to move with that level of coordination. Yet Roman soldiers did. Ancient writers frequently commented on the discipline of the Roman army. Enemies often expected Roman soldiers to become exhausted after long marches. Instead, they would arrive at their destination and immediately begin constructing defenses, organizing supplies, and preparing for battle. This reliability became one of Rome's greatest weapons. Imagine being a tribal leader preparing to face such an army. Reports arrive describing soldiers who can march for miles carrying heavy equipment. Reports describe armies that build fortified camps every night. Reports describe formations that continue fighting even after suffering casualties. The stories begin sounding less like descriptions of ordinary soldiers and more like legends. Of course, Rome was not invincible. Roman armies suffered defeats. Roman commanders made mistakes. Entire legions were occasionally destroyed. Yet even Rome's enemies often respected the military system they fought against. One famous example occurred in the forests of Germania during the year 9 AD. 3 Roman legions were ambushed and destroyed in what became known as the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. It was one of the worst military disasters in Roman history, yet what makes the event remarkable is what happened afterward. Many ancient armies might have collapsed after such a defeat. Rome did not. The empire rebuilt. New legions were raised. Training continued. The military machine kept functioning. This ability to recover from disaster shocked many opponents. Rome's strength did not depend upon a single battle. It depended upon institutions. A lost army could be replaced. A defeated commander could be removed. The system survived. This was one reason so many enemies feared Rome. Defeating a Roman army was difficult enough. Defeating Rome itself was something else entirely. As the centuries passed, stories about Roman military power spread throughout the ancient world. Merchants carried those stories along trade routes. Travelers repeated them in distant cities. Soldiers shared them around campfires. The reputation of the Roman army often arrived long before the soldiers themselves. In some regions, people had never seen a Roman legion in person, yet they had heard stories. Stories about disciplined formations, stories about massive engineering projects, stories about roads built across mountains and valleys, stories about armies appearing where nobody expected them. Whether every story was true mattered less than the overall effect. The reputation itself became a weapon. Fear has always played an important role in warfare. An enemy who doubts himself before a battle begins has already lost part of the fight. Rome understood this. The empire projected strength not only through military victories, but through consistency. Again and again, Roman armies appeared, completed their objectives, and returned home. That reliability created confidence among Roman citizens and concern among Roman enemies. For many communities living near the borders of the empire, the arrival of a Roman army represented uncertainty. Would Rome demand tribute, establish a garrison, build a road, negotiate an alliance, launch a campaign? No one knew. But everyone paid attention, because when Rome arrived, change often followed. The fascinating thing is that most Roman soldiers probably did not view themselves as legendary figures. They were ordinary men performing difficult jobs. They worried about food, weather, pay, family, and survival. They marched long distances. They repaired equipment. They followed orders. They spent far more time training, building camps, and carrying supplies than actually fighting. Yet from the perspective of those watching them arrive, they seemed extraordinary. A Roman legion represented more than soldiers. It represented an empire. Every shield carried the symbols of Rome. Every banner reflected Roman authority. Every officer acted in the name of Roman power. When villagers saw a Roman army approaching, they were not simply seeing thousands of men. They were seeing the empire itself. And that is why so many people feared Rome. Not because Roman soldiers were superhuman, not because they never lost battles, not because they possessed magical weapons, but because they belonged to one of the most organized, disciplined, and determined military systems the ancient world had ever known. And this was only the beginning, because the real secret behind Rome's success was not the fear it inspired. It was the training, discipline, and organization that made such fear possible in the first place. And that is exactly where our story will continue. If there was one quality that separated the Roman army from nearly every other military force of the ancient world, it was not strength, courage, or even numbers. Many armies possessed brave warriors. Many kingdoms could gather thousands of men when war arrived. What made Rome different was discipline. To the Romans, discipline was not simply a military value. It was the foundation upon which their entire military system was built. Without discipline, an army became a crowd. With discipline, an army could conquer continents. To understand why so many enemies feared Rome, it is important to understand what life was actually like for a Roman soldier. The popular image of Roman soldiers often focuses on dramatic battles, shining armor, and famous victories. Yet the truth is that most Roman soldiers spent far more time training than fighting. In fact, many soldiers would serve for years without ever participating in a major battle. Their daily lives were filled with drills, inspections, marches, construction projects, and endless repetition. While this may sound boring, it was precisely this routine that transformed ordinary men into one of the most effective fighting forces in history. A new recruit entering the Roman army quickly discovered that military life was not easy. Training began almost immediately. Recruits were expected to learn how to march long distances while carrying heavy equipment. They practiced with weapons that were often heavier than those used in actual combat. Wooden training swords weighed more than real swords. Practice shields were frequently heavier than the shields carried into battle. Roman instructors believed that if a soldier could train with heavier equipment, fighting with normal equipment would feel easier by comparison. The training was physically demanding, but it also served another purpose. It built habits. Roman commanders understood that fear affects every human being. During battle, confusion spreads quickly. Men become tired. Noise overwhelms communication. Under those conditions, soldiers do not rise to the level of their hopes. They fall back on their training. Rome wanted that training to be automatic. A soldier should not have to think about how to raise his shield or maintain formation. Those actions needed to become second nature. Ancient writers often described Roman training as relentless. Recruits practiced marching, weapon drills, formation movements, and construction work repeatedly. Day after day, they performed the same exercises. Modern readers sometimes imagine that ancient warfare relied primarily on individual skill, but Roman military leaders viewed things differently. They believed consistency was more valuable than heroics. A disciplined soldier following orders was often far more useful than a talented warrior acting independently. The Roman army placed enormous importance on formations. Individual bravery mattered, but battles were rarely won by individuals. They were won by groups of soldiers working together. A Roman legion functioned almost like a machine. Every soldier had a role. Every unit had responsibilities. Every commander understood where his men should be and what they should be doing. This organization allowed Roman armies to perform complicated maneuvers that many opponents struggled to match. Imagine standing across a battlefield from a Roman legion. The soldiers do not appear as scattered individuals. Instead, they move as a single body. Shields rise together. Lines advance together. Commands travel through the ranks with remarkable efficiency. To an enemy accustomed to less organized forces, the sight could be intimidating. It often seemed as though the Romans possessed a level of control that bordered on the impossible. Discipline extended beyond combat. Roman soldiers were expected to maintain their equipment carefully. Armor needed cleaning. Weapons required sharpening and inspection. Camps had to remain organized. Roads had to be maintained. Supplies needed accounting. Roman military leaders believed that carelessness in small matters often led to failure in larger ones. A soldier who neglected his equipment might later discover that a damaged strap or dull blade could have serious consequences. Punishments within the Roman army could be severe. Roman commanders took discipline seriously because they understood how important it was to battlefield success. Soldiers who ignored orders, abandoned duties, or endangered their fellow soldiers could face harsh consequences. While modern readers may find some of these punishments extreme, they reflected Rome's belief that military discipline was essential for survival. A single soldier's mistake could sometimes place an entire unit at risk. At the same time, discipline was not based solely on fear. Roman soldiers also developed a strong sense of pride in their units. Legions earned reputations through years of service. Victories became part of a legion's identity. Soldiers often felt connected not only to Rome itself, but also to the specific units in which they served. This sense of belonging encouraged cooperation and loyalty. Men fought not only for personal survival, but for their comrades and their legion's honor. Another reason Roman discipline became so famous was its consistency. Many ancient armies were temporary forces assembled during times of war. Once a campaign ended, soldiers returned home. Rome increasingly relied upon professional soldiers whose lives revolved around military service. These men trained year-round. They followed routines designed to maintain readiness. As a result, Roman armies often entered battles better prepared than their opponents. One of the most remarkable aspects of Roman discipline was its ability to survive difficult circumstances. Armies often faced challenges beyond combat. Weather, hunger, exhaustion, disease, and uncertainty can all weaken morale. Yet Roman armies repeatedly demonstrated an ability to continue functioning under harsh conditions. Soldiers marched through rain, heat, snow, and difficult terrain. They carried equipment for long distances. They built camps after exhausting marches. They adapted to unfamiliar environments far from home. This reliability became one of Rome's greatest advantages. Enemies never knew exactly where Roman armies might appear. The combination of discipline and endurance allowed Roman forces to travel farther and operate longer than many opponents expected. Again and again throughout history, enemies underestimated what Roman soldiers could accomplish. They assumed exhaustion would slow them down. They assumed difficult terrain would stop them. They assumed long distances would create problems. Often, the Romans simply kept moving. The discipline of the Roman army also influenced other civilizations. Neighboring kingdoms observed Roman methods and sometimes attempted to copy them. Historians have long noted that Rome's military success was not based on a single invention or secret weapon. Rather, it resulted from a combination of organization, training, leadership, and discipline working together. None of these elements alone guaranteed victory. Together, however, they created a military system that proved remarkably effective. Perhaps the most impressive thing about Roman discipline is that it transformed ordinary people into extraordinary soldiers. The men who joined the army were not superheroes. They came from farms, villages, towns, and cities throughout the empire. Many arrived with little military experience. Through training, repetition, and discipline, they became part of something larger than themselves. The Roman army succeeded not because every soldier was exceptional, but because its system consistently produced reliable results. When ancient enemies spoke about Rome, they often mentioned this quality. They respected the ability of Roman soldiers to maintain order when others might panic. They admired the endurance that allowed legions to continue operating under difficult conditions. They feared the discipline that kept Roman formations intact during battle. These qualities did not develop overnight. They were the product of years of training and a military culture that valued preparation above almost everything else. By the time a Roman legion appeared on the horizon, much of the battle had already been fought long before anyone drew a sword. The endless drills, inspections, marches, and routines had prepared the soldiers for the challenges ahead. What enemies saw was not merely an army. They saw the result of one of the most disciplined military systems the ancient world had ever created. And yet, discipline alone was not enough to build an empire. Training could create skilled soldiers, but Rome possessed another advantage that made it even more dangerous. It was not a weapon. It was not armor. It was not even the soldiers themselves. It was the ability to make thousands of men think, move, and fight as a single unit. That secret would become one of the greatest strengths of the Roman military. And it is exactly where our story will continue next. When most people imagine the Roman army, they usually think about weapons. They picture soldiers carrying short swords, large shields, polished helmets, and heavy armor as they march across distant battlefields. The famous Roman sword, known as the gladius, has become one of the most recognizable symbols of Roman military power. So has the large shield, the helmet, the armor, and the image of disciplined soldiers standing together in formation. Yet if you look closely at why Rome became so successful in war, the true answer is not found in the sword alone. Rome's greatest weapon was not something a soldier could hold in his hand. It was the ability to take thousands of ordinary men and make them move, think, and fight together as one organized force. In the ancient world, this was much harder than it sounds. Communication was slow. There were no radios, phones, or instant messages. Orders had to be carried by voice, signal, messenger, or written instruction. A commander could not simply speak to every soldier at once across a noisy battlefield. Dust, shouting, fear, and confusion could easily break an army apart. Many ancient forces relied heavily on individual courage, personal loyalty, or the reputation of powerful leaders. Rome used those things too, but it also built something stronger and more reliable. It built a system. Every soldier had a place. Every unit had a purpose. Every officer had a responsibility. That system allowed Roman armies to continue functioning even when the battlefield became frightening and uncertain. Imagine standing across from a Roman legion before battle. From a distance, the soldiers may look like rows of men with shields and weapons, but as they begin to move, something different becomes clear. They do not rush forward as scattered individuals. They do not break into separate groups searching for personal glory. They move with order. Their shields rise together. Their lines hold together. Their officers keep their positions. Each soldier understands that his own safety depends on the men beside him, and their safety depends on him. The army becomes more than a crowd of warriors. It becomes a single body made from thousands of disciplined parts. This was one of the great differences between Rome and many of its enemies. In some societies, warriors gained honor by proving themselves individually. A brave fighter might charge ahead, seeking attention and glory. That kind of courage could be impressive, but it could also be dangerous. A man who broke formation might expose the soldiers around him. A man who ignored orders could create confusion at the worst possible moment. Roman military culture valued bravery, but it valued controlled bravery. A Roman soldier was expected to be courageous, but also obedient. He was expected to fight hard, but not carelessly. He was expected to trust the formation more than his own desire for glory. The shield is a good example of this idea. A Roman shield protected the soldier carrying it, but it also helped protect the men around him. When soldiers stood close together, their shields formed a wall that was stronger than any one shield alone. Each man's position mattered. If one soldier panicked and stepped out of line, the protection weakened. If several soldiers did it, the formation could collapse. This meant that every soldier had to think beyond himself. He had to understand that his discipline protected the group, and the group protected him. That simple idea gave Roman armies tremendous strength. Roman commanders also understood that clear organization made armies more flexible. The Roman army was divided into units with leaders at different levels. Smaller groups could receive orders from officers, while larger formations could be directed by higher commanders. This chain of command allowed instructions to move through the army more effectively. When conditions changed, Roman commanders could respond. If one part of the line came under pressure, nearby units might support it. If the army needed to change direction, withdraw, advance, or hold position, the structure made that possible. This did not mean Roman armies always acted perfectly. They were still human beings, and mistakes still happened. But compared to many opponents, Rome's military organization gave it a powerful advantage. Training made this system work. Soldiers did not become coordinated simply by standing together once. They practiced the same movements again and again until they became natural. They learned how to march in step, how to hold their shields, how to follow commands, and how to stay in position under pressure. They practiced so often that many actions became habits. This mattered because battle was terrifying. When fear rises, people do not always think clearly. Rome wanted soldiers to respond from training, not panic. If a man had raised his shield thousands of times in practice, he was more likely to raise it correctly when danger came. If a unit had practiced holding formation again and again, it was more likely to hold together when the enemy advanced. Another important part of Rome's secret weapon was standardization. Roman soldiers generally trained in similar ways, used similar equipment, and followed similar expectations. This made cooperation easier. A soldier transferred from one place to another could still understand the basic structure around him. Officers could give commands, knowing that soldiers had been trained to understand them. Units could work together, because they shared the same military language. In a world where many armies were temporary collections of warriors, this kind of consistency was extremely valuable. The Roman army also learned over time. Rome did not begin as the unstoppable power people later remember. Early Roman armies faced many dangers, suffered defeats, and made mistakes. But Rome had a habit that made it dangerous. It adapted. When enemies introduced new tactics, Rome studied them. When defeats exposed weaknesses, Rome adjusted. When different regions required different strategies, Roman commanders learned from experience. This ability to learn helped the army survive across centuries. Rome fought in forests, deserts, mountains, plains, and cities. No single method could work everywhere. So the Roman military system became strong, partly because it could change while still keeping its core discipline. Enemies often found this frustrating. Defeating Roman soldiers once did not always mean Rome was finished. A victory against Rome could be followed by another Roman army arriving later, better prepared and more determined. The system did not depend on one heroic commander or one perfect army. It depended on institutions, training, organization, and the ability to replace losses. That made Rome different from many rivals. Some kingdoms could be shaken badly by one disastrous defeat. Rome could suffer terrible losses and still return. This is why Rome's greatest weapon was not only the sword. The sword was useful, but only because it was carried by men trained to use it within a larger system. The shield was powerful, but only because soldiers understood how to protect one another with it. Armor mattered, but armor alone could not create victory. What made Roman armies so dangerous was the combination of equipment, discipline, leadership, training and organization working together. The weapon was not one object. The weapon was the system itself. To those watching from the outside, that system could feel frightening. A Roman army did not always look wild or emotional before battle. It often looked calm, prepared, and controlled. Soldiers stood where they were ordered to stand. Officers moved through the ranks. Standards rose above the formation. Commands passed from one group to another. Everything suggested that the army had been built for this exact moment. That calmness could be intimidating. An enemy might wonder what kind of men could stand so steadily when danger was near. Of course, Roman soldiers were not machines. They were ordinary human beings. They felt fear. They became tired. They missed home. They worried about injury and death. Some were brave. Some were nervous. And some were probably simply trying to survive the day. But the strength of the Roman system was that it did not require every man to be a fearless hero. It required men to follow training, trust each other, and remain part of the formation. That made the army more reliable than a force depending only on individual courage. In the end, Rome's secret weapon was the ability to turn many individuals into one disciplined force. This is what enemies feared when they saw Roman soldiers approaching. They were not simply looking at men with swords, They were looking at an organized military machine built through years of training and centuries of experience. They were looking at an empire that had learned how to make order out of chaos and how to make ordinary soldiers act with extraordinary coordination. And yet, this organization becomes even more impressive when we remember what Roman soldiers were expected to do before they ever reached the battlefield. They did not simply stand in formation and fight. They marched for miles across difficult roads, carrying heavy equipment, food, tools, weapons, and supplies. They crossed mountains, forests, rivers, and deserts. They appeared in places where enemies did not expect them. Rome's soldiers were not only disciplined in battle, they were disciplined on the march. And that ability to keep moving day after day would become another reason why so many people feared the arrival of Rome. One of the most frightening things about the Roman army was not just how it fought, but how it moved. Long before a battle began, Roman soldiers were already proving their strength through the march itself. To many enemies, the arrival of a Roman army could feel almost impossible. One day, the road ahead seemed empty. A few days later, thousands of disciplined soldiers appeared on the horizon, carrying weapons, tools, food, armor, and supplies, as if the distance itself had not slowed them down. This ability to move quickly, consistently, and in good order became one of Rome's greatest advantages. In the ancient world, moving an army was not simple. There were no trucks, trains, or modern supply systems. Roads could be rough, weather could change suddenly, rivers could block movement, and mountains could slow even the strongest force. Armies needed food, water, animals, equipment, and places to rest. A large force that moved carelessly could become tired, hungry, scattered, and vulnerable before it ever saw the enemy. Rome understood this very well. That is why marching was not treated as a simple walk from one place to another. It was a military skill, practiced and disciplined like everything else in the Roman army. A Roman soldier on campaign carried far more than just a sword and shield. He might carry tools, cooking equipment, food, personal belongings, stakes for building camp defenses, and other supplies needed for life on the road. The weight could be exhausting, especially over long distances. Yet Roman soldiers trained for this. They learned to carry heavy loads while maintaining pace. They learned to march in formation without losing order. They learned how to continue moving even when the road was dusty, the sun was hot, or the air was cold and wet. The march itself became a test of discipline. To enemies watching from a distance, Roman marching could appear almost unnatural. Many ancient forces moved like large gatherings of warriors, with people spread out, talking, stopping, rushing, and drifting out of formation. A Roman column looked different. It moved with structure. Soldiers followed assigned positions. Officers kept watch over the pace. Supplies and baggage followed in an organized way. Scouts moved ahead to search for danger. Guards protected vulnerable parts of the column. The entire army seemed to know where it belonged. This mattered because an army that marched well could choose when and where to fight. Speed gave Rome options. If a rebellion broke out in one province, Roman troops could be sent along roads to restore control. If an enemy threatened a border, legions could move toward the danger. If a commander needed to surprise an opponent, a disciplined march could place Roman soldiers somewhere the enemy did not expect them to appear so quickly. Rome's ability to move was a form of power. The Roman road system made this even more effective. Over time, Rome built roads across enormous distances, connecting cities, forts, ports, and provinces. These roads were not built only for trade or travel. They were also military tools. A good road allowed soldiers to move faster, supply wagons to travel more easily, and messages to pass between distant places. Enemies might see a road as a path, but Rome saw it as a line of control. Wherever Roman roads stretched, Roman influence could follow. Imagine living near the edge of Roman territory and hearing that a legion has been ordered in your direction. You might think distance will protect you. You might assume that hills, forests, rain, or rough ground will slow them down. Yet the Romans are used to discomfort. They march through it. They carry what they need. They repair roads, cross rivers, and build temporary camps. The very obstacles that might exhaust another army become simply another task for Roman soldiers to complete. Ancient writers often noted the endurance of Roman troops. A standard march could cover many miles in a single day, but Roman soldiers were also capable of forced marches when necessary. A forced march could push men much harder than usual, demanding speed and stamina under difficult conditions. These marches were exhausting, but they allowed Roman commanders to respond quickly to threats or reach important locations before enemies expected them. The ability to march faster than an opponent could change the outcome of an entire campaign. Of course, this endurance did not come naturally. It was trained. Recruits practiced marching long distances while carrying heavy equipment. They learned how to keep pace with the men around them. They learned how to manage fatigue. They learned how to move as part of a larger formation rather than as individuals. The Roman army understood that a soldier who could not endure the march might not be useful when battle finally arrived. A tired, disorganized army was vulnerable. A tired but disciplined army could still be dangerous. There was also a psychological effect to Roman marching. When enemies saw Roman soldiers arriving in good order after a long journey, it sent a message. These men were not easily discouraged. They had crossed distance, weather, and hardship, and still arrived prepared. That kind of reliability could weaken enemy confidence before fighting even began. It suggested that Rome was patient, determined, and difficult to stop. The march also connected with another Roman habit that made enemies uneasy. At the end of a day's movement, Roman soldiers did not simply collapse wherever they happened to stop. They often built a fortified camp. Even after marching for hours, they dug trenches, raised defenses, organized tents, posted guards, and created a secure place to rest. To enemies watching this happen, it must have been astonishing. Another army might arrive tired and exposed. A Roman army arrived tired and then built walls. This routine showed how deeply discipline shaped Roman life. Marching, building, eating, resting, guarding and preparing all followed patterns. Each day on campaign was not random. Soldiers knew what was expected. Officers knew what needed to be done. Supplies were organized. Animals were managed. Camps were planned. The army carried a kind of moving order with it, creating structure wherever it went. For soldiers, this could be exhausting. Marching day after day with heavy equipment was not romantic. It was painful, repetitive, and tiring. Feet ached. Shoulders grew sore. Dust covered clothing and armor. Rain turned roads into mud. Heat drained strength. Cold nights made sleep difficult. Many soldiers probably complained quietly, just as soldiers have always complained throughout history. Yet they kept moving, because that was what Roman discipline demanded. This is part of why Rome was feared. It was not only feared in moments of battle, it was feared because it could keep coming. An enemy might retreat into difficult terrain, only to discover Roman soldiers following. A town might think itself safe because of distance, only to see a Roman column arrive sooner than expected. A commander might believe he had time to prepare, only to learn that the legions were already near. The Roman march turned distance into something less protective. The sight of a marching Roman army must have been unforgettable. Standards rising above the column. Shields and helmets catching the sunlight. Wagons creaking behind the soldiers. Officers riding or walking along the line. Dust rising beneath thousands of feet. The sound would have carried across the landscape before the army fully appeared. Step after step, mile after mile, the Roman military machine moved forward. And yet, behind that powerful image were ordinary men enduring an ordinary hardship. They were hungry, tired, thirsty, and sore. They thought about home. They hoped for rest. They watched the road ahead and counted the miles behind them. What made them dangerous was not that they felt no discomfort. It was that they had been trained to keep moving despite it. By the time a Roman army reached its destination, the enemy was not facing fresh men who had traveled easily. They were facing soldiers who had already passed one test after another before the battle even began. The march had tested their endurance. The road had tested their discipline. The weight of their equipment had tested their bodies. And still, they arrived in formation, ready to build, guard, organize, and fight. This is why Roman marching deserves its own place in the story of Rome's military power. It was not glamorous. It was not as dramatic as battle, but it was one of the quiet reasons Rome became so difficult to resist. The empire could move its strength across land with remarkable consistency. Its soldiers did not simply appear strong when standing still. They carried that strength across roads, mountains, fields, and frontiers. And after a long day of marching, when many enemies might expect them to rest helplessly in the open, Roman soldiers did something even more surprising. They began to build. Trenches were dug. Walls were raised. Gates were marked. Guards were posted. By nightfall, the army that had marched all day could be sitting safely behind its own defenses. This habit of building a fortified camp almost every night would become another reason why Rome was so feared. And it is where our story continues next. One of the most remarkable habits of the Roman army had nothing to do with fighting. It was not a weapon, a formation, or a battlefield tactic. In fact, it was something that took place after the marching was finished and before the soldiers went to sleep. To many enemies, it seemed almost unbelievable. A Roman army could spend an entire day traveling across difficult terrain, carrying heavy equipment beneath the hot sun, and then, instead of immediately resting, the soldiers would begin building a fortified camp. This routine became one of the most famous features of Roman military life, and one of the many reasons why Rome earned a reputation for discipline and preparation throughout the ancient world. Imagine marching for hours with armor, weapons, tools, food, and supplies weighing heavily on your shoulders. The roads are dusty. Your feet ache. The sun has drained much of your energy. By the time evening arrives, most people would want nothing more than a place to sit, eat, and sleep. Yet Roman soldiers were expected to do much more. As soon as a suitable location was selected, work began. Officers organized the troops, assignments were distributed, and thousands of tired men transformed themselves from soldiers into builders. What appeared to be an empty piece of land slowly became an organized military camp designed to provide safety throughout the night. To modern people, this might sound excessive. Why spend valuable time and energy building defenses when the army's only staying for a single night? Roman commanders understood the answer. The ancient world could be unpredictable and dangerous. Enemies might launch surprise attacks. Scouts could misjudge the situation. Small groups of hostile warriors might attempt raids under the cover of darkness. An army sleeping in the open was vulnerable. An army protected by walls, trenches, gates, and guards was much harder to threaten. The Romans believed that a few hours of labor before sunset could prevent disaster before sunrise. The process of building a camp followed a system refined through centuries of military experience. Roman officers first selected a suitable location. The ground needed to be large enough to accommodate the entire force and practical enough to support the army's needs. Access to water was important whenever possible. Terrain was carefully considered. Once the location had been chosen, soldiers began marking out the perimeter of the camp. This was not done randomly. Roman camps followed organized layouts that remained remarkably consistent from one location to another. The same attention to detail that appeared in Roman roads, cities, and military formations also appeared in the design of their camps. One of the first major tasks involved digging a defensive trench around the outer edge of the camp. This trench served as an obstacle against attackers while also providing soil that could be used to create a raised defensive embankment. Wooden stakes carried by the soldiers during the march were then placed along these defenses. To an approaching enemy, the result could look surprisingly formidable, especially considering that it had been constructed in only a few hours. The Romans understood that even simple defenses could provide a significant advantage when combined with discipline and organization. Inside the camp, order continued to shape everything. Roads were laid out in planned patterns. Tents were arranged according to unit assignments. Officers occupied designated areas. Supplies were stored in specific locations. Animals were secured where they could be monitored. Guards were assigned to defensive positions. Everything had a purpose. Soldiers arriving at a newly constructed camp knew exactly where their unit belonged because the layout followed familiar principles. This consistency reduced confusion and helped the army function efficiently even after exhausting days on the road. The Roman camp was more than a place to sleep. It was a temporary military headquarters, a supply center, a defensive position, and a carefully organized community all at the same time. Within its boundaries, soldiers could rest with greater confidence, knowing that defenses surrounded them and guards remained alert throughout the night. Commanders could issue orders, manage supplies, and prepare for the next day's movements. The camp provided structure, and structure was one of the foundations of Roman military success. Ancient enemies frequently noticed this habit. Imagine being a scout observing a Roman army from a nearby hill. Throughout the day, you watch thousands of soldiers marching across the landscape. By evening, they arrive at an open field. You expect them to stop and collapse from exhaustion. Instead, they begin digging trenches. They raise defenses. They organize tents. They establish guard posts. As darkness falls, what was once an empty patch of land has become a fortified military camp. To many observers, this level of preparation was impressive, and perhaps even intimidating. It suggested that Roman soldiers expected danger and were always ready for it. This routine also reveals something important about Roman military culture. Rome valued preparations over convenience. Building a camp required effort. Digging trenches was hard work. Carrying tools alongside weapons increased the burden of the march. Constructing defenses consumed time and energy that could otherwise have been spent resting. Yet Roman leaders believed that preparation paid off. A secure camp reduced risks, improved morale, and protected valuable supplies. It also reinforced habits of discipline. Soldiers learned that responsibility did not end when the march was over. Their duties continued until the camp was complete. The engineering skills involved in camp construction benefited Rome in many other ways as well. Roman soldiers became experienced builders because military life required constant construction work. Men who regularly built camps also learned skills useful for constructing roads, bridges, forts, siege works, and defensive positions. Throughout the empire, Roman armies demonstrated an ability to reshape landscapes in support of military objectives. The camp represented one small example of a much larger tradition of Roman engineering and practical problem-solving. Another advantage of the Roman camp was predictability. Because camps followed similar designs, soldiers could move between different armies and still understand the basic layout. Officers knew where important locations would be found. Supplies could be organized efficiently. Communication became easier. In many ways, the camp functioned as a physical expression of the Roman military system itself. It transformed chaos into order and uncertainty into structure. Every trench, road, tent, and guard post reflected the Roman belief that preparation created strength. Of course, not every soldier enjoyed this work. After long marches, many men were undoubtedly tired and eager for rest. Complaints almost certainly existed, just as they do in every military throughout history. Yet the system continued because it worked. Time after time, Roman camps provided protection and stability during campaigns. They helped armies survive difficult conditions and reduced the risks associated with operating in hostile territory. The effort invested each evening often paid dividends throughout the night and into the next day. Over the centuries, Roman camps became one of the defining features of Roman warfare. Travelers described them. Historians recorded them. Enemies learned to respect them. The sight of a Roman army building defenses after a long march demonstrated something fundamental about Rome's approach to military operations. Success was not based solely on courage or battlefield skill. It was built through habits, routines, preparation, and organization. The camp was a daily reminder that Rome preferred to solve problems before they became crises. This mindset helped explain why the Roman military remained effective for so long. Soldiers were taught to think ahead. Commanders were expected to plan carefully. Armies prepared for threats rather than merely reacting to them. The fortified camp symbolized this philosophy perfectly. While others rested, Rome prepared. While others trusted luck, Rome built defenses. While others hoped for safety, Rome created it with its own hands. By sunset, the transformation was complete. An army that had spent the day marching now sat behind trenches and defenses. Guards watched the perimeter. Supplies were organized. Roads ran through the camp. Tents filled the designated spaces. Fires burned within the secure boundaries of the settlement. What had been open ground only hours earlier now resembled a small fortified town. The soldiers could finally rest, knowing they had reduced many of the dangers that accompanied life on campaign. Yet even fortified camps and disciplined soldiers could not have conquered an empire on their own. Armies needed food, equipment, information, reinforcements, and supplies. They needed a way to move men and materials efficiently across enormous distances. Fortunately for Rome, the empire possessed another advantage that would become one of the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world. Stretching across provinces, mountains, valleys, and borders was a vast network of roads that connected the empire together. These roads allowed armies to travel faster, communicate more effectively, and maintain control over distant territories. And it was those roads, perhaps more than anything else, that helped transform Rome from a powerful city into a world-spanning empire. When people think about the Roman Empire, they often imagine powerful armies, famous emperors, enormous arenas, and legendary battles. Yet one of Rome's greatest achievements was something far less dramatic. It did not wear armor. It did not carry a sword. It did not stand on a battlefield. Instead, it stretched across mountains, crossed rivers, connected distant cities, and tied together one of the largest empires in human history. It was the Roman road system. While Roman soldiers may have won battles, Roman roads helped make those victories possible. In many ways, the roads were just as important to Rome's success as the armies that marched upon them. The ancient world was a vast place filled with obstacles. Dense forests covered large areas of Europe. Mountain ranges separated regions from one another. Rivers could become barriers that slowed travel and trade. Long distances made communication difficult. Before modern transportation, simply moving people and supplies from one place to another could take enormous amounts of time and effort. Many ancient civilizations struggled with these challenges. Rome chose to solve them. Over the centuries, Roman engineers built thousands of miles of roads connecting cities, military forts, ports, settlements, and provinces throughout the empire. These roads became one of the greatest engineering projects of the ancient world. Some stretched across rolling countryside. Others crossed mountains and valleys. Many passed through regions that had once seemed difficult to reach. Together, they formed a network that connected distant parts of the empire in ways that few civilizations had ever achieved before. To modern travelers, a road may not seem especially impressive. Most people use roads every day without giving them much thought. In the ancient world, however, a well-built road could transform an entire region. It could reduce travel time, improve communication, support trade, and allow military forces to move quickly when needed. The Romans understood this better than almost anyone else. Building these roads required remarkable planning and effort. Roman engineers carefully surveyed routes before construction began. They selected paths that balanced efficiency with practicality. Workers dug foundations, laid layers of stone, and created durable surfaces designed to withstand years of use. Drainage systems helped protect roads from water damage. Bridges were constructed where necessary. The result was infrastructure that often lasted far longer than anyone expected. In fact, some Roman roads remained usable for centuries after the empire itself had declined. The military benefits of these roads were enormous. Imagine receiving news that trouble has erupted hundreds of miles away. A rebellion has begun in a distant province. An enemy force threatens a border. A local governor requests assistance. Without reliable roads, responding quickly could be difficult or even impossible. Armies might become delayed by rough terrain, poor weather, or logistical challenges. With roads, movement became far more predictable. Roman commanders could calculate travel times more accurately and move troops where they were needed. For enemies of Rome, this created a serious problem. Distance often provides a sense of security. People living far from a powerful government may believe they have time before that government can respond. Roman roads reduced that advantage. News traveled faster. Orders moved more efficiently. Reinforcements could arrive sooner than expected. Time and again, Roman armies appeared in places where opponents assumed they would not arrive for weeks. Imagine being a tribal leader living near the edge of Roman territory. You hear reports that Rome is aware of your activities. Perhaps you believe that mountains, forests, or distance will slow any response. Yet somewhere far away, Roman officials have already sent messages. Orders are issued. Soldiers begin moving. Because roads connect key parts of the empire, the military response unfolds with surprising speed. What once seemed like a comfortable distance suddenly feels much smaller. The roads also supported one of the most important aspects of warfare: logistics. Historians often describe logistics as the art of supplying armies. While battles may capture attention, armies cannot survive without food, equipment, animals, and other necessities. A hungry army is a weak army. An army without supplies cannot remain effective for long. Roman roads helped ensure that supplies could move where they were needed. Supply wagons traveled along these routes carrying food, weapons, tools, replacement equipment, and other materials essential to military operations. Communication moved along the same roads. Messengers carried reports between provinces and the capital. Government officials traveled between important locations. Merchants transported goods. The roads served countless purposes simultaneously, supporting both military and civilian life throughout the empire. One of the reasons Roman roads became so effective was consistency. Travelers generally knew what to expect. Roads followed established routes. Distances were measured and marked. Important locations connected to one another through planned networks rather than isolated pathways. This reliability allowed people to plan journeys more effectively. For military leaders, predictable travel times could be extremely valuable when organizing campaigns. The famous saying, "All roads lead to Rome," reflects this reality, although the phrase is often misunderstood. Not every road literally led to the city of Rome. The deeper meaning is that Rome sat at the center of a vast network connecting the empire together. Roads linked provinces to administrative centers, military installations, ports, and major cities. They helped transform a collection of territories into a connected political and economic system. Travelers throughout the empire frequently encountered Roman roads. Merchants transporting goods relied upon them. Government officials used them during inspections and administrative duties. Soldiers marched along them during military campaigns. Pilgrims, messengers, craftsmen, farmers, and countless others benefited from the infrastructure Rome had created. The roads became part of daily life for millions of people. The military connection remained especially important. Roman soldiers spent much of their careers marching, and roads made those marches more efficient. A disciplined army, moving along a well-constructed road, could cover significant distances while maintaining organization. Officers could keep units together more easily. Supply wagons encountered fewer obstacles. Communication remained more reliable. All of these advantages contributed to Rome's ability to project power across vast territories. Enemies often learned this lesson the hard way. A region that appeared secure could suddenly face the arrival of Roman troops. Local leaders who expected delays discovered that roads had reduced those delays dramatically. The empire's infrastructure allowed military power to travel. A Roman road might appear peaceful during ordinary times, filled with merchants and travelers. During a crisis, the same road could carry soldiers, supplies, and messages necessary to restore order. The construction of roads also reflected something deeper about Roman culture. Rome believed in organization, planning, and long-term thinking. Building a road required significant effort. Workers spent months or even years completing major projects. The benefits were not always immediate, yet Roman leaders understood that infrastructure created future opportunities. A road built today might support military campaigns, trade, communication, and economic growth for generations. This willingness to invest in the future helped distinguish Rome from many rivals. Roads represented confidence. They suggested permanence. They demonstrated that Rome expected to remain present in a region for a long time. A road was more than a transportation route. It was a statement that Rome intended to connect, govern, and influence the surrounding territory. Over time, roads helped spread more than soldiers and supplies. Ideas traveled along them. Languages spread. Cultures interacted. Goods moved between regions. Information circulated more rapidly. The empire became increasingly interconnected. While military power helped create Roman territory, roads helped hold that territory together. Many historians argue that roads were among Rome's most important strategic advantages. A powerful army matters little if it cannot reach the places where it is needed. Roman roads solved that problem. They transformed geography from an obstacle into an asset. They allowed commanders to respond more quickly, coordinate more effectively, and maintain greater control over distant provinces. For the ordinary Roman soldier, the roads became a familiar part of life. Day after day, legions marched along them during campaigns. Soldiers learned to measure progress by milestones and landmarks. They watched roads stretch toward distant horizons, connecting one province to another. The roads carried them across mountains, through valleys, along rivers, and toward destinations they often could not yet see. Wherever they traveled, the presence of Roman roads reminded them that they were part of something larger than themselves. By the height of the empire, Rome had created a transportation network unlike anything the ancient world had previously known. These roads helped armies move, governments function, and economies grow. They connected people across enormous distances and reinforced Roman influence throughout the empire. While battles may have earned glory, roads helped make those victories sustainable. And yet, even roads and disciplined soldiers were not enough on their own. Rome also possessed powerful weapons, effective armor, skilled engineers, and military technology that gave its armies additional advantages. The soldiers who marched those roads carried equipment designed through centuries of experience and adaptation. Understanding that equipment helps explain why Roman armies became so respected and feared. And that is where our story continues next. When people think about the power of the Roman army, they often imagine disciplined soldiers marching in formation. But eventually, every battle came down to something more immediate. At some point, armies met face to face. Orders were shouted, shields collided, weapons were raised. In those moments, the equipment carried by Roman soldiers became incredibly important. Yet one of the biggest misconceptions about Roman military success is the belief that Rome conquered the ancient world because it possessed superior weapons. The truth is more complicated. Roman weapons were effective, but their greatest strength came from how they were used within a larger military system built on training, discipline, and organization. The average Roman legionary carried equipment that had been refined through generations of military experience. Every piece served a purpose. Roman commanders constantly learned from victories and defeats, making adjustments whenever necessary. Unlike some armies that relied heavily on tradition, Rome was often willing to adopt new ideas if they improved military effectiveness. This willingness to adapt helped create equipment that worked well across many different environments and against many different enemies. Perhaps the most famous Roman weapon was the gladius, the short sword carried by legionaries during much of Rome's most successful period. Modern movies often portray the gladius as a weapon used for dramatic slashing attacks, but Roman soldiers were generally trained to use it differently. The sword was relatively short compared to many weapons used by neighboring peoples. This made it especially useful in close formations where soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder. Instead of relying on wide swings that required space, Roman soldiers often focused on quick, controlled thrusts aimed at vulnerable areas. This approach worked well because it complemented the disciplined formations in which Roman soldiers fought. The effectiveness of the gladius did not come from the weapon alone. A sword is only as useful as the person carrying it. Roman soldiers spent countless hours practicing with wooden training weapons that were often heavier than real swords. By the time a soldier entered battle, using the actual weapon felt easier and more natural. This training allowed Roman troops to use their equipment efficiently while maintaining formation. Once again, Rome's success came not from a magical weapon, but from a combination of equipment and preparation. Alongside the gladius, Roman soldiers carried one of the most recognizable pieces of military equipment in history, the large shield known as the scutum. The shield provided protection against arrows, spears, and close combat attacks. Its size allowed soldiers to cover much of their bodies while remaining part of a larger defensive line. The shield was not simply a personal defensive tool, it functioned as part of a collective system. When Roman soldiers stood together, their shields created a protective barrier that helped the entire unit. Each man's shield strengthened the formation, and the formation strengthened each man. Roman soldiers also carried a weapon called the pilum, a heavy throwing spear designed to be used shortly before close combat began. The pilum represented another example of Roman practicality. Its purpose was not simply to wound enemy soldiers, it could also disrupt enemy formations and damage shields. An incoming volley of pila could create confusion at exactly the moment Roman soldiers wanted to advance. Enemies forced to deal with incoming spears often found themselves less prepared when Roman infantry closed the distance. This combination of missile weapons, followed by disciplined infantry attacks, became one of the hallmarks of Roman warfare. Armor provided another layer of protection. Over the centuries, Roman soldiers used several different styles of armor, depending on the period and circumstances. Some armor consisted of overlapping metal plates. Other forms relied on chainmail. Regardless of the exact design, the goal remained the same. Armor increased a soldier's chances of surviving combat, while allowing him to continue fighting effectively. Although armor could be heavy and uncomfortable, Roman soldiers accepted this burden because protection often meant the difference between life and death. Helmets played an equally important role. Roman military helmets evolved over time, but most shared common features, designed to protect the head while maintaining visibility and hearing. The helmet protected one of the most vulnerable parts of the body, and often included cheek guards for additional safety. Combined with shields and armor, helmets helped create soldiers who were difficult to injure compared to many opponents who relied on lighter equipment. Yet perhaps the most overlooked Roman weapon was not carried by individual soldiers at all. It was engineering. Roman armies frequently traveled with engineers, builders, surveyors, and specialists capable of constructing military equipment when needed. These men could build bridges, roads, siege towers, defensive walls, and countless other structures. While enemy armies often viewed engineering as a secondary concern, Rome treated it as an essential military skill. The ability to reshape the environment provided advantages that could be just as valuable as any sword or spear. Siege warfare offers a perfect example of this strength. Many ancient cities protected themselves with walls, believing those walls would discourage attackers. Roman armies often responded by building machines specifically designed to overcome such defenses. Siege towers allowed soldiers to approach walls more safely. Battering rams attacked gates and fortifications. Catapults and other artillery systems launched projectiles against defenders. These technologies did not guarantee success, but they demonstrated Rome's willingness to solve problems through engineering, rather than relying solely on brute force. Roman military camps also reflected this engineering mindset. As discussed earlier, soldiers frequently built fortified camps at the end of a day's march. This habit required tools, planning, and practical construction skills. Roman soldiers often carried tools alongside their weapons because military leaders understood that armies needed more than combat equipment. They needed the ability to build, repair, and adapt. A shovel could sometimes be just as important as a sword. One reason Roman equipment proved so effective was standardization. Soldiers generally used similar weapons, shields, and armor. This consistency simplified training and logistics. Officers knew what equipment their men possessed. Replacement parts could be distributed more easily. New recruits learned familiar systems. Standardization may sound less exciting than dramatic battlefield stories, but it contributed significantly to military efficiency. Enemies frequently noticed the practical nature of Roman equipment. The weapons were not always the largest or most intimidating. Roman armor was not always the most elaborate. What impressed observers was how well everything worked together. The shield supported the formation. The sword complemented the shield. The spear disrupted the enemy before close combat. The armor improved survivability. The engineering capabilities solved logistical and tactical problems. Every component served a role within a larger military system. The Roman approach reflected a broader philosophy. Military success did not come from relying on a single advantage. It came from combining many advantages into a coordinated whole. A well-trained soldier carrying effective equipment was valuable. Thousands of well-trained soldiers carrying effective equipment and operating within an organized structure became far more dangerous. Rome consistently focused on systems rather than individual elements. Of course, Roman weapons were not perfect. Different enemies required different approaches. Over the centuries, Rome encountered new tactics, unfamiliar terrain, and opponents with their own strengths. Some enemies relied heavily on cavalry. Others excelled at ranged combat. Still others fought in ways that challenged traditional Roman methods. Rather than stubbornly refusing to change, Roman military leaders often adapted. Equipment evolved. Tactics shifted. New ideas were incorporated when they proved useful. This adaptability became one of Rome's greatest strengths. The empire survived for centuries, partly because it learned from experience. Defeats revealed weaknesses. Victories highlighted strengths. The military system continued evolving. Weapons changed, armor changed, and tactics changed. But the underlying commitment to discipline, organization, and preparation remained remarkably consistent. To an enemy standing across a battlefield, Roman equipment represented more than metal and wood. The shield symbolized discipline. The sword reflected training. The armor represented preparation. The engineering capabilities demonstrated problem-solving. Every piece of equipment reminded opponents that they were facing an army designed to function efficiently under difficult conditions. When historians study Rome today, they often emphasize that the empire's success cannot be explained by weapons alone. Many civilizations possessed impressive weapons. What made Rome different was the ability to combine equipment, training, leadership, logistics, engineering, and discipline into a unified military system. The weapons mattered, but they mattered most because of the soldiers using them and the organizations supporting them. By this point in our story, we have seen how Roman soldiers trained, marched, built camps, traveled along roads, and carried equipment refined through centuries of experience. Yet even with all these advantages, Rome still faced powerful enemies. Some opponents challenged Roman expansion for years. Others inflicted painful defeats. Some nearly changed the course of history itself. Understanding those enemies helps us appreciate just how difficult Rome's rise truly was. And that is where our story continues next. It is easy to look back at the Roman Empire and assume that its victories were inevitable. Rome controlled vast territories, built one of the most powerful military systems in history, and influenced countless generations that followed. From a modern perspective, the empire can appear almost unstoppable. Yet the people who lived during Rome's rise would not have seen it that way. Roman soldiers marched into battle without knowing whether they would return. Roman commanders faced enemies who were intelligent, determined, and often extremely dangerous. The empire that eventually dominated much of the known world was built through centuries of struggle against opponents who repeatedly tested Rome's strength. One of the reasons Rome became such a formidable power was because it faced so many challenges. Each enemy forced the Romans to adapt, improve, and learn. Defeats exposed weaknesses. Victories revealed strengths. Over time, these experiences helped transform Rome from a regional power into a military force feared across continents. The story of Rome is not simply a story of conquest. It is also a story of survival against rivals who sometimes came frighteningly close to changing history. Among Rome's most famous enemies was Carthage, a wealthy and powerful civilization located in North Africa. Carthage controlled important trade routes throughout the Mediterranean and possessed considerable military resources. For generations, Rome and Carthage competed for influence, wealth, and territory. This rivalry eventually erupted into a series of conflicts known as the Punic Wars, some of the most important wars in ancient history. The most famous figure to emerge from these wars was Hannibal, one of the greatest military commanders the world has ever known. Even thousands of years later, his name remains closely connected to military genius. Hannibal achieved something that many people considered impossible. Leading an army that included war elephants, he crossed the Alps and invaded Italy itself. The journey was incredibly dangerous. Mountains, harsh weather, difficult terrain, and constant logistical challenges threatened the army every step of the way. Yet Hannibal succeeded in bringing his forces into Roman territory. For the Romans, this was a terrifying moment. An enemy commander had done what few thought possible. Worse still, Hannibal proved exceptionally skilled in battle. He defeated Roman armies repeatedly, often using tactics that surprised his opponents. At battles such as Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae, Roman forces suffered devastating losses. The defeat at Cannae remains one of the most famous military disasters in history. Thousands of Roman soldiers were killed, and many people feared that Rome itself might collapse. Yet Rome survived. That fact tells us something important about the Roman system. Even after suffering catastrophic defeats, the Republic continued fighting. New armies were raised, resources were mobilized, citizens remained committed to the struggle. While Hannibal won remarkable victories, he ultimately could not destroy Rome's ability to recover. The war lasted for years, testing both sides to their limits. In the end, Rome prevailed, but the experience left a lasting impression. The Romans learned valuable lessons about strategy, logistics, and perseverance from one of their most dangerous enemies. While Carthage threatened Rome from the south, other dangers emerged from different directions. To the north lived numerous tribal groups, often referred to collectively as the Gauls. These peoples occupied large parts of what is now France and surrounding regions. The Gauls were diverse, with different cultures, leaders, and traditions, but they shared a reputation as fierce warriors. Long before Rome reached the height of its power, Gallic forces had demonstrated their strength by attacking Roman territory and even sacking the city of Rome itself in the 4th century BC. The memory of that event remained deeply embedded in Roman culture. For centuries afterward, many Romans viewed the Gauls with a mixture of fear and respect. Later, Roman commanders, including Julius Caesar, would lead campaigns against Gallic tribes as Rome expanded its influence into Western Europe. Caesar's campaigns became some of the most famous military operations in Roman history. They demonstrated Rome's growing strength, but they also revealed the determination of the people resisting Roman expansion. One of Caesar's most formidable opponents was Vercingetorix, a Gallic leader who succeeded in uniting many tribes against Rome. This was no small achievement. The tribes often had different interests and priorities, yet Vercingetorix recognized the danger Rome posed. He organized resistance and forced the Romans into difficult situations. The resulting conflict produced some of the most dramatic moments in Caesar's campaigns. Although Rome ultimately emerged victorious, the struggle reminded Roman leaders that even powerful armies could face serious challenges when confronting determined opponents. Farther north and east lived another group of peoples who would become closely associated with Rome's military history: the Germanic tribes. Like the Gauls, these groups were diverse and varied. They occupied vast regions beyond the traditional borders of Roman control. Roman writers often describe Germania as a land of forests, rivers, and independent communities. Military campaigns in these regions could be extremely difficult. Terrain limited movement, communication became more complicated, supply lines stretched over long distances. The dangers of these campaigns became painfully clear in the year 9 AD during the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. 3 Roman legions under the command of Publius Quinctilius Varus were ambushed and destroyed. The defeat shocked the Roman world. Entire legions disappeared. Thousands of soldiers were killed. Roman expansion into Germania suffered a major setback. Historians often describe the battle as one of the most significant defeats in Roman history. What makes the disaster particularly important is that it demonstrated Rome's vulnerability. The empire was powerful, but it was not invincible. Poor decisions, difficult terrain, and skilled opponents could produce catastrophic results. Yet once again, Rome responded by rebuilding. New forces were organized, defenses were strengthened, lessons were learned. The empire survived because its strength depended on more than any single army or campaign. To the east, Rome encountered another formidable rival: the Parthian Empire. Unlike many tribal opponents, the Parthians controlled a sophisticated state with considerable resources and military expertise. They became one of Rome's most persistent rivals. The Parthians were especially famous for their cavalry, particularly mounted archers, capable of striking enemies from a distance while remaining highly mobile. Roman armies often found themselves challenged by these tactics. Traditional Roman strengths worked best under certain conditions, and Parthian cavalry introduced new complications. One of the most famous examples occurred at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC, where Roman forces under Marcus Licinius Crassus suffered a devastating defeat. The battle demonstrated that Roman armies could struggle when facing opponents who fought differently from those they had encountered before. Yet Rome's response remained consistent. Defeats encouraged adaptation rather than surrender. Roman commanders studied their opponents. New tactics were developed. Lessons from one campaign influenced future operations. The military system evolved because it had to. Every serious enemy forced Rome to become more capable than it had been before. Perhaps the most interesting thing about Rome's enemies is that many of them possessed strengths the Romans admired. Roman writers often praised the courage of certain opponents. They respected military skill, leadership, and determination, even when those qualities appeared in enemies. This willingness to learn from others helped Rome survive. Instead of assuming they already knew everything, Roman leaders often examined what worked and adjusted accordingly. The empire's greatest victories often came only after years of struggle. Success was rarely immediate. Campaigns lasted for decades. Borders shifted. Alliances changed. Battles were won and lost. Through it all, Rome continued adapting. Every enemy contributed something to the development of the Roman military system. Hannibal taught Rome valuable lessons about strategy and persistence. The Gauls demonstrated the importance of political unity and military preparedness. The Germanic tribes revealed the dangers of unfamiliar terrain and overconfidence. The Parthians exposed weaknesses that required new solutions. By the time Rome reached the height of its power, its military system reflected centuries of experience gained through conflict with a wide variety of opponents. The legions had been shaped not only by victories, but also by defeats. Every challenge left its mark. Every enemy contributed to Rome's evolution. In a strange way, some of Rome's greatest achievements were made possible by the very people who tried to stop it. This reality helps explain why the Roman military became so respected throughout the ancient world. It was not powerful because it had never been tested. It was powerful because it had survived so many tests. Again and again, Rome faced capable enemies. Again and again, it adapted and endured. The result was a military machine built not only on discipline and organization, but also on centuries of hard-earned experience. And yet, despite all these victories, armies alone did not create Roman success. Behind every legion stood an enormous system of supplies, engineers, officers, administrators, craftsmen, and workers who kept the military functioning. The soldiers may have stood on the battlefield, but they were supported by something much larger. Understanding that system helps explain how Rome maintained military power across such vast distances, and it is where our story continues next. When most people think about the Roman army, they imagine soldiers standing in formation, marching along roads, or fighting famous battles. While those images are certainly part of the story, they only reveal a small portion of what made Rome so powerful. Behind every legion stood an enormous network of people, resources, and organization that allowed the military to function. Roman armies did not operate alone. They were supported by administrators, engineers, craftsmen, laborers, merchants, officers, scouts, messengers, doctors, and countless others whose work rarely appeared in dramatic stories of conquest. Together, these people formed what historians often call the Roman war machine. The term war machine can sound intimidating, but in reality it refers to something surprisingly practical. Rome's military success depended on solving problems. Armies needed food. Soldiers needed equipment. Horses needed care. Roads required maintenance. Messages had to travel between commanders and distant provinces. Supplies had to reach troops operating hundreds of miles from home. None of these tasks involved dramatic battlefield heroics, yet all of them were essential. A hungry army could not fight effectively. A poorly supplied army could not remain in the field for long. Rome understood this better than most civilizations of the ancient world. One of the greatest challenges faced by any military force is logistics. Modern historians often describe logistics as the art of moving and supplying armies. It may not sound exciting, but logistics frequently determines whether military campaigns succeed or fail. Roman commanders knew that winning battles required preparation long before the first soldier entered combat. Food needed to be collected and transported. Equipment had to be manufactured and distributed. Animals required feed and care. Roads and transportation networks had to remain functional. Every campaign depended on thousands of decisions made far away from the battlefield itself. Imagine a Roman legion preparing to leave for a distant province. The soldiers cannot simply pick up their weapons and start marching. Supplies must be gathered. Wagons must be prepared. Officers must organize routes and schedules. Blacksmiths repair damaged equipment. Quartermasters track inventories. Messengers carry orders between different locations. What appears to be a simple military movement is actually a highly organized operation involving many different people. Rome's ability to coordinate these activities gave it an enormous advantage over many opponents. The Roman army also benefited from a sophisticated administrative system. Records were kept, supplies were counted, personnel were tracked, officers reported information through chains of command. While paperwork may seem far removed from warfare, organization helped ensure that resources reached the people who needed them. Rome's military success was built not only on courage, but also on management. Someone always needed to know how many soldiers were available, how much food remained, and what equipment required replacement. Engineers played a particularly important role within the Roman military. Earlier, we discussed the roads and camps that helped support Roman campaigns. Those achievements were possible because Rome invested heavily in engineering skills. Military engineers designed bridges, roads, fortifications, siege equipment, and defensive structures. They helped armies cross rivers, navigate difficult terrain, and overcome obstacles that might stop less prepared forces. In many campaigns, engineering proved just as important as combat. A bridge completed at the right moment could change an entire military operation. The Romans also understood the importance of communication. Orders needed to travel quickly across large distances. Governors reported information to central authorities. Commanders shared intelligence about enemy movements. Messengers carried updates between units. Without communication, even the most powerful army could become confused and ineffective. Rome's roads, administrative systems, and organizational structure all helped ensure that information moved efficiently throughout the empire. Medical care represented another important part of the Roman military system. Ancient medicine was far less advanced than modern healthcare, but Roman armies still recognized the value of treating injured soldiers whenever possible. Military doctors accompanied armies. Medical facilities existed in some military installations. Wounded soldiers received treatment that might improve their chances of recovery. Keeping experienced soldiers alive and healthy benefited both the individual and the army as a whole. The Roman military also relied on specialists with unique skills. Surveyors measured land and planned construction projects. Blacksmiths repaired weapons and armor. Builders constructed defenses. Scouts gathered information about terrain and enemy positions. Sailors supported naval operations. Each specialist contributed something important to the larger system. The success of Roman armies depended on many different forms of expertise working together. One reason Rome became so effective was its ability to combine all of these elements into a coordinated structure. Many civilizations possessed brave warriors. Some had talented commanders. Others developed impressive technologies. Rome's advantage came from integration. Roads supported logistics. Logistics supported armies. Armies protected roads. Engineers improved transportation. Administrators managed resources. Every part reinforced the others. The result was a military system that often functioned more effectively than the sum of its individual components. This organization became especially important as the empire expanded. Controlling a large territory creates challenges. Distant provinces require communication. Borders require protection. Rebellions require responses. Supplies must move across vast distances. As Rome grew, the military system evolved to meet these demands. The empire invested in infrastructure, administration, and logistics because maintaining power required more than battlefield victories. It required the ability to sustain military operations over long periods of time. Imagine being an enemy leader observing Rome from afar. At first, you may notice the soldiers. Then you notice the roads, then the forts, then the supply wagons, then the administrative structure supporting everything else. Gradually, it becomes clear that defeating a single Roman army would not necessarily solve the problem. Behind that army stands an entire system capable of producing replacements, delivering supplies, and continuing operations. This realization often frustrated Rome's opponents. They were not simply fighting soldiers. They were confronting an organized empire. The Roman war machine was not perfect. Mistakes occurred. Supplies sometimes failed to arrive. Commanders occasionally made poor decisions. Corruption existed. Political conflicts affected military operations. Yet despite these flaws, the overall system proved remarkably resilient. Rome repeatedly demonstrated an ability to recover from setbacks, reorganize resources, and continue functioning after defeats that might have crippled other states. This resilience became one of Rome's greatest strengths. Military disasters occurred throughout Roman history. Entire armies were sometimes lost. Campaigns failed. Provinces revolted. Yet the empire often recovered because its military power rested on institutions rather than individuals alone. New commanders could be appointed, additional soldiers could be recruited, resources could be redirected. The system endured. Perhaps the most impressive aspect of the Roman war machine is that many of its most important contributors remain largely invisible in traditional stories. History often celebrates generals and battles, but countless unnamed workers help make Roman success possible. The laborer repairing a road, the blacksmith forging equipment, the messenger carrying orders, and the engineer building a bridge all contributed to the empire's military effectiveness. Their work rarely earned fame, yet, without them, the legions could not have operated as they did. Over time, Rome's reputation grew not only because of military victories, but also because of this organizational strength. Enemies learned that Roman power extended beyond individual armies. Behind every legion stood roads, supplies, administration, engineering, and logistics. The military machine could absorb setbacks, learn from mistakes, and continue moving forward. That combination of flexibility and structure made Rome exceptionally difficult to defeat. By now, we have explored many of the reasons why Rome became such a feared military power. We have examined discipline, training, teamwork, marching, camp construction, roads, weapons, and the larger system supporting military operations. Together, these elements help explain why Roman armies achieved so much over such a long period of time. Yet there is one final question worth asking. How did Rome's enemies actually view the empire? What did people think when they heard that Roman soldiers were approaching? Understanding those perspectives helps reveal just how powerful Rome's reputation had become. And it is where our story continues next. Long before modern historians began studying the Roman Empire, people were already writing about Rome. Soldiers who fought against the legions spoke about them. Tribal leaders discussed them around campfires. Merchants carried stories about Roman armies across trade routes. Travelers repeated rumors in distant towns and villages. Some of these stories were exaggerated, others were surprisingly accurate. Together, they helped create one of the most powerful military reputations in the ancient world. By the height of Rome's power, many people feared the Roman army before they ever saw a single soldier. Reputation has always been an important part of warfare. An army does not need to win every battle to become feared. Sometimes stories travel faster than soldiers. Victories are repeated and retold. Defeats are forgotten or explained away. Over time, a military force can develop an image that becomes almost as powerful as its actual strength. Rome understood this. Its armies did not merely conquer territory. They also created a reputation that spread across continents. For many enemies, hearing that Roman legions were approaching was enough to cause concern long before any fighting began. Part of this reputation came from consistency. Throughout history, many armies achieved occasional victories. Few maintained success over centuries. Rome repeatedly demonstrated an ability to organize armies, respond to threats, recover from defeats, and continue expanding its influence. To outsiders, this reliability could seem almost unstoppable. An enemy might defeat one Roman force only to discover another arriving months later. A rebellion might achieve temporary success before being met by a new military response. Again and again, Rome showed that it was difficult to discourage. Ancient writers often commented on the discipline of Roman soldiers. Some enemies admired it, others feared it. Many struggled to understand it. To people accustomed to less organized military forces, Roman formations could appear unusual. Soldiers moved together. Commands were followed. Camps were built with remarkable consistency. Roads appeared wherever Roman armies traveled. These habits created an impression that Rome possessed a level of organization beyond that of many neighboring societies. The Greek historian Polybius, who spent considerable time studying Rome, was particularly interested in understanding why Roman power continued growing. He observed the Roman military system closely and recognized that its strength came from more than courage alone. Discipline, training, organization, and preparation all contributed to Roman success. His writings helped preserve valuable information about how the Roman army functioned and why it became so effective. Julius Caesar's writings also provide insight into how Rome viewed its enemies and how those enemies responded to Rome. During his campaigns in Gaul, Caesar frequently described tribes reacting to Roman movements. Some chose to negotiate, others resisted. Many understood that confronting Rome directly carried significant risks. Caesar's accounts naturally present events from a Roman perspective, but they still reveal the respect and concern Roman armies inspired among their opponents. One of the most famous examples of Rome's reputation can be seen in the reaction of many communities when Roman legions entered a region. Not every town needed to be conquered through force. Sometimes the mere arrival of a Roman army encouraged local leaders to cooperate rather than fight. This did not happen because Roman soldiers were invincible. It happened because Rome's reputation suggested that resistance might prove costly. Military power becomes especially effective when people believe in it. At the same time, Rome's enemies were not simply frightened victims waiting for conquest. Many were intelligent leaders making difficult decisions. They understood their own strengths and weaknesses. Some believed they could defeat Roman armies under the right conditions. Others hoped geography, alliances, or local knowledge would provide advantages. In many cases, they were correct. Roman armies suffered defeats throughout their history. The difference was that Rome often responded to those defeats by adapting and returning stronger. Hannibal provides one of the best examples of an enemy who earned Roman respect. His victories during the Second Punic War shocked the Roman world. At battles such as Cannae, he demonstrated tactical brilliance that military historians still study today. Even Roman writers who viewed him as an enemy often acknowledged his skill. The fact that Hannibal came so close to changing history helped reinforce Rome's reputation in an unusual way. When Rome eventually survived the challenge, its ability to endure became part of its legend. The Germanic tribes who confronted Rome also developed strong opinions about Roman power. Some respected Roman discipline and organization. Others viewed Rome as a threat to their independence. Leaders such as Arminius understood Roman methods because they had direct experience with the empire. His victory in the Teutoburg forest demonstrated that Roman armies could be defeated. Yet the battle also highlighted something else. Even after suffering one of the worst disasters in its history, Rome remained powerful enough to continue influencing the region. The defeat became famous precisely because major Roman defeats were relatively uncommon compared to Rome's many successes. To the east, the Parthians viewed Rome as both rival and threat. Their long struggle with the empire produced centuries of competition. Neither side could easily dominate the other. Roman commanders respected Parthian cavalry, while Parthian leaders understood the strengths of Roman infantry and engineering. The relationship demonstrated that Rome was not universally superior in every circumstance. Different regions produced different challenges. Yet even where Rome struggled, its reputation remained significant. Merchants and travelers also played an important role in spreading stories about Rome. Trade routes connected distant parts of the ancient world. Information moved alongside goods. A traveler who witnessed a Roman military camp might describe it to people hundreds of miles away. A merchant who saw Roman roads could tell others about their quality and scale. Stories about Roman engineering, discipline, and military power circulated far beyond the empire's borders. People who never met a Roman soldier often developed opinions about Rome through second-hand accounts. Some of these stories undoubtedly became exaggerated. Human beings have always enjoyed telling dramatic tales. Victories grow larger with retelling. Distances become greater. Numbers increase. Yet even exaggerated stories contribute to reputation. An enemy hearing such tales may not know exactly what to believe. The uncertainty itself can create concern. If half the stories are true, Rome still sounds formidable. If all the stories are true, Rome sounds almost unstoppable. One fascinating aspect of Rome's reputation is how often it emphasized reliability rather than individual heroism. Many cultures celebrated legendary warriors capable of extraordinary feats. Rome certainly admired bravery, but its reputation focused more on discipline and organization. People feared Roman armies not because every soldier was a hero, but because the entire system worked together so effectively. The roads, camps, logistics, training, and command structures all reinforced one another. Rome's strength seemed systematic rather than accidental. This reputation created advantages before battles even began. A nervous enemy may make mistakes. Leaders worried about Roman capabilities might hesitate when decisive action is needed. Allies could become less confident. Neutral communities might choose cooperation over resistance. Military power is always important, but perception matters as well. Rome benefited from both. Its actual strength reinforced its reputation, and its reputation reinforced its actual strength. Yet perhaps the most remarkable thing about Rome's reputation is that it survived long after many of the people involved were gone. Soldiers died. Commanders passed away. Empires changed. Generations came and went. Still, stories about Rome continued circulating. Historians wrote about Roman victories and defeats. Travelers visited Roman ruins. Military leaders studied Roman campaigns. The reputation outlived the empire itself. Today, thousands of years later, people still discuss Roman roads, Roman armies, Roman engineering, and Roman strategy. Few ancient civilizations remain as recognizable to modern audiences. That enduring interest reflects the power of Rome's legacy. The empire became more than a political state. It became a symbol of organization, ambition, and military effectiveness. For Rome's enemies, the empire often appeared larger than life. Sometimes that perception was accurate. Sometimes it was exaggerated. Most often, it was a combination of both. Rome possessed genuine strengths, and those strengths produced stories. The stories spread. The reputation grew. Over time, fear, respect, admiration, and concern combined into one of history's most famous military images. By the end of Rome's rise, many people understood a simple reality. Roman soldiers were not superhuman. Roman commanders were not perfect. Roman armies could be defeated. Yet defeating Rome was extraordinarily difficult because behind every legion stood centuries of experience, discipline, organization, and adaptation. That reality became the foundation of Rome's reputation and helped explain why so many people hesitated when they heard a familiar piece of news. The Romans were coming. And after exploring the training, roads, weapons, enemies, logistics, and reputation that made Rome so powerful, only one final question remains. What lessons did Rome leave behind? And why does the empire continue to capture our imagination thousands of years later? That is where our story concludes. As we reach the end of Rome's military story, it is worth asking a simple question. Why do people still talk about Rome? Thousands of years have passed since Roman legions marched across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. The empire itself is gone. Its emperors are long dead. Its soldiers have disappeared into history. Yet Rome continues to capture the imagination of people around the world. Historians study it. Writers tell stories about it. Archaeologists search for its remains. Travelers visit its ruins. Few civilizations have left such a lasting impression on human history. Part of the answer lies in the sheer scale of what Rome accomplished. At its height, the Roman Empire controlled vast territories stretching across multiple continents. Millions of people lived under Roman rule. Hundreds of cities were connected through roads, trade routes, and administrative systems. Messages traveled across enormous distances. Goods moved between provinces. Laws were enforced across regions that differed greatly in language, culture, and geography. Managing such a large empire was an extraordinary challenge, yet Rome succeeded in doing so for centuries. The military played a major role in this achievement. Throughout this series, we have explored many of the reasons why Roman armies became so respected. We examined their discipline, training, organization, roads, weapons, logistics, engineering, and ability to adapt. None of these strengths alone explains Rome's success. What made Rome remarkable was how all of these elements worked together. The empire built systems that allowed ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. Roman soldiers were not born different from other human beings. They became effective because they were part of a larger structure designed to produce consistent results. One of Rome's greatest strengths was its willingness to learn. Many civilizations throughout history achieved success only to become overconfident. They assumed that past victories guaranteed future success. Rome often took a different approach. The empire suffered defeats, sometimes devastating ones. Armies were destroyed. Commanders made mistakes. Enemies achieved surprising victories. Yet Rome repeatedly responded by adapting. Problems became lessons. Weaknesses became opportunities for improvement. The military system evolved because Roman leaders understood that survival required change. This ability to learn can be seen throughout Roman history. The Romans learned from Hannibal during the Punic Wars. They learned from conflicts with the Gauls. They learned from encounters with Germanic tribes. They learned from struggles against the Parthians and countless other opponents. Every challenge forced the empire to improve. In many ways, Rome became stronger because its enemies were strong. Difficult opponents revealed weaknesses that might otherwise have remained hidden. Another reason Rome became legendary was its emphasis on long-term thinking. The empire invested in roads that took years to build. It trained soldiers for campaigns that had not yet begun. It constructed forts, bridges, and infrastructure that would serve future generations. Roman leaders often understood that lasting success required patience. A road built today might support trade and military operations for centuries. A disciplined army developed over years of training could protect the empire far more effectively than a force assembled in haste. The Roman road system remains one of the best examples of this philosophy. To many people, roads may seem ordinary, yet the roads helped connect the empire together. They allowed armies to move, goods to travel, and information to spread. They transformed geography from an obstacle into an advantage. Even today, some Roman roads remain visible, reminding us of the ambition and engineering skill that helped shape the ancient world. Rome's engineering achievements extended far beyond roads. Aqueducts carried water across impressive distances. Bridges crossed rivers. Ports supported trade. Public buildings demonstrated architectural innovation. Military engineers solved practical problems wherever they appeared. The Roman ability to combine military power with engineering skill became one of the defining characteristics of the empire. Conquest may have expanded Roman territory, but infrastructure helped hold that territory together. The empire also became legendary because of its influence on later civilizations. Roman law influenced legal systems. Roman engineering inspired future builders. Roman military organization shaped later armies. Latin, the language of Rome, influenced many modern languages. Even people who know very little about Roman history encounter its legacy in everyday life. Elements of Roman culture continue to echo through modern societies in ways that are often easy to overlook. Of course, Rome was not perfect. Like all civilizations, it faced serious problems. Political struggles created instability. Corruption existed. Economic difficulties emerged. Social inequalities affected daily life. Military victories often came at tremendous human cost. Conquered peoples sometimes suffered greatly under Roman rule. Understanding Rome honestly means recognizing both its achievements and its flaws. The empire was powerful, but it was still created and governed by human beings. And human beings are never perfect. This complexity is one reason Rome remains such a fascinating subject. It cannot be reduced to a simple story of heroes and villains. It was a civilization capable of remarkable achievements and serious mistakes. It built roads while fighting wars. It created legal systems while experiencing political conflict. It produced great works of engineering while facing social challenges. The contradictions make Rome feel real. It was not a myth. It was a society filled with people trying to navigate a complicated world. For the average Roman soldier, many of these larger historical themes would have seemed distant. A legionary likely spent more time thinking about food, equipment, weather, and daily responsibilities than about future historians. He marched where he was ordered to march. He followed routines. He maintained his equipment. He built camps. He trained alongside fellow soldiers. Yet collectively, millions of ordinary actions performed by ordinary people helped create one of the most influential civilizations in history. This may be one of the most important lessons Rome leaves behind. History is not shaped only by famous leaders. Emperors, generals, and politicians certainly matter. But large achievements often depend upon countless individuals performing their responsibilities day after day. Roads are built by workers. Armies function because soldiers follow routines. Governments operate because administrators perform tasks that rarely receive attention. Rome succeeded not only because of extraordinary individuals, but because ordinary people contributed to systems larger than themselves. When people throughout the ancient world heard that Roman armies were approaching, they were responding to more than military power. They were responding to everything that stood behind those armies. They were responding to roads, logistics, engineering, discipline, administration, training, and centuries of accumulated experience. Rome inspired fear because it represented a complete system rather than a collection of isolated strengths. That reputation survived long after the empire itself began to change. Even when Roman political power weakened, stories about Rome continued spreading. Scholars preserved knowledge. Writers recorded events. Monuments remained standing. Future generations looked back at Rome and saw something extraordinary. The empire became a reference point against which other civilizations measured themselves. Whether people admired Rome, criticized it, or simply studied it, they rarely ignored it. Today, the ruins of Roman cities can still be found across large parts of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Broken columns rise from the ground. Ancient roads cut across landscapes. Forts, walls, and amphitheaters remind visitors of a world that once seemed permanent. These remains help explain why Rome continues to feel alive in the modern imagination. The empire may be gone, but evidence of its existence remains visible thousands of years later. Perhaps that is the true reason Rome became a legend. It was not because it never failed. It was not because it conquered every enemy. It was not because it was perfect. Rome became legendary because it combined ambition, organization, resilience, and adaptability on a scale rarely seen in human history. It built systems that endured. It learned from challenges. It left a legacy that continued influencing the world long after the empire itself had faded. As we look back across the centuries, it becomes easier to understand why Roman history continues to attract attention. The story is not simply about battles or emperors. It is about people, ideas, systems, and the effort required to build something lasting. It is about a civilization that rose from a small city to become one of the most influential powers the world has ever known. And while Rome itself eventually changed and declined, its story did not end. In many ways, it continues today whenever people study its history, walk along its ancient roads, admire its engineering, or ask the same question that has fascinated generations before them. How did Rome become Rome? That question has inspired historians, travelers, and dreamers for centuries. And it is the reason the legacy of Rome continues to endure long after the final legion marched into history. As our journey through the history of Rome comes to an end, it is worth taking one final moment to step back and look at the larger picture. Throughout these chapters, we have explored many of the reasons why the Roman Empire became one of the most powerful civilizations in human history. We have followed the legions as they trained, marched, built camps, traveled along roads, carried their weapons, faced dangerous enemies, and operated within one of the most organized military systems the ancient world had ever seen. Yet perhaps the most interesting lesson of Rome is that its success was never the result of a single secret. There was no magical weapon that guaranteed victory. There was no perfect general who solved every problem. There was no single battle that instantly transformed Rome into a world power. Instead, Rome became successful through the accumulation of countless small advantages working together over long periods of time. Discipline reinforced training. Training improved teamwork. Teamwork strengthened formations. Roads supported logistics. Logistics sustained armies. Engineering improved mobility. Organization connected everything together. Each part made the others stronger. This is one of the reasons historians continue to study Rome so carefully. The empire reminds us that great achievements are often built gradually rather than suddenly. When people look back at Roman history, they sometimes focus only on the dramatic moments. They remember famous battles, powerful emperors, and legendary victories. Those events are certainly important, but they represent only part of the story. Behind every famous event stood years of preparation, planning, and effort that rarely receives the same attention. Consider the Roman roads we discussed earlier. A road may not seem exciting compared to a battlefield victory, yet roads allowed armies to move, supplies to travel, and information to spread. A single road could influence events for generations. The same principle applies to many aspects of Roman society. Small improvements accumulated over time. Systems became more efficient. Institutions became stronger. The empire benefited from the combined effect of countless practical decisions made over centuries. The Roman military provides perhaps the clearest example of this process. A recruit entering the army did not immediately become part of a legendary fighting force. He trained. He learned discipline. He practiced routines. He marched long distances. He built camps. He followed orders. Day after day, ordinary habits shaped extraordinary results. By the time Roman soldiers appeared on distant battlefields, much of their success had already been determined by years of preparation. This focus on preparation helps explain why Rome often appeared so resilient. Throughout its history, the empire faced setbacks that might have destroyed other states. Armies were defeated. Provinces rebelled. Political conflicts emerged. Economic difficulties created challenges. Yet Rome repeatedly found ways to recover. Part of that resilience came from the systems supporting the empire. Roads still existed. Institutions still functioned. New armies could be raised. Supplies could be gathered. The structure remained even when individual parts failed. Another lesson of Rome involves adaptation. Many civilizations throughout history achieved success and then struggled to change. Rome certainly experienced periods of rigidity and resistance to new ideas, but it also demonstrated a remarkable ability to learn from experience. Enemies exposed weaknesses. Defeats revealed problems. New circumstances demanded different solutions. Again and again, Roman leaders adjusted their methods in response to challenges. This willingness to adapt helped the empire survive situations that might otherwise have proven disastrous. The enemies of Rome played an important role in this process. Hannibal challenged Roman strategy. The Gauls tested Roman expansion. Germanic tribes revealed the dangers of unfamiliar terrain. The Parthians exposed weaknesses against highly mobile cavalry forces. Every major opponent forced Rome to improve. In a strange way, some of Rome's greatest teachers were the very people trying to defeat it. Without those challenges, the Roman military might never have developed into the force it eventually became. Looking beyond warfare, Rome also leaves behind a broader lesson about human ambition. The empire built roads across continents, constructed aqueducts that carried water for miles, established cities in distant regions, and created systems capable of governing enormous populations. These achievements required imagination as well as effort. They remind us of what people can accomplish when they organize resources, cooperate on large projects, and commit themselves to long-term goals. At the same time, Rome's history serves as a reminder that no civilization lasts forever. The empire that once dominated much of the known world eventually changed. Borders shifted. Political structures evolved. New powers emerged. The world moved forward. This reality makes Roman history even more fascinating. The ruins that remain today are reminders that even the most powerful civilizations are temporary. Great achievements may endure, but the societies that create them continue to evolve and transform over time. Yet while Rome itself eventually faded, its influence survived. Roman law influenced later legal traditions. Roman engineering inspired future builders. Roman military ideas shaped later armies. Languages descended from Latin spread across continents. Roads, cities, and monuments left visible traces across large portions of the world. In many ways, Rome continued influencing history long after its political power had declined. Perhaps this is why Rome still captures our imagination. The empire feels both distant and familiar. Its people lived thousands of years ago, yet many of their concerns remain recognizable. They worried about security, leadership, prosperity, family, and the future. They built careers, solved problems, argued about politics, and tried to improve their lives. The details may differ from modern life, but the human experience often feels surprisingly similar. When we study Rome, we are not simply studying an empire. We are studying people. We are studying what happens when individuals work together toward shared goals. We are studying the successes and failures that shape civilizations. We are studying the relationship between preparation and achievement, between ambition and limitation, between power and responsibility. These themes remain relevant long after the specific events themselves have passed into history. If someone living in the ancient world had asked why Rome became so powerful, the answer might have sounded complicated. Some would point to the legions. Others would point to roads, leadership, geography, wealth, or discipline. In truth, all of these factors mattered. Rome succeeded because many strengths reinforced one another. The empire created systems that multiplied the effectiveness of individuals and allowed ordinary efforts to produce extraordinary results. As we reach the end of this story, imagine standing on a Roman road as the sun begins to set. In the distance, a column of soldiers marches steadily toward the horizon. Their armor catches the fading light. The road stretches onward through fields and hills, connecting places far beyond what the eye can see. Behind those soldiers stands a vast network of roads, cities, engineers, workers, merchants, administrators, and countless ordinary people whose efforts help sustain the empire. Ahead of them lies another destination, another challenge, another chapter in Rome's long history. The soldiers eventually disappear from view. The sun sinks lower. The sounds of marching fade into the distance. Yet the road remains. The ideas remain. The lessons remain. That may be Rome's greatest legacy of all. Not the battles, not the emperors, not even the empire itself, but the reminder that lasting achievements are often built through patience, preparation, organization, and the steady effort of ordinary people working together towards something larger than themselves. And with that final thought, our journey through the rise of Rome comes to an end. The roads stretch quietly into the distance. The legions pass into history. The centuries continue moving forward. Yet the story of Rome endures, waiting for each new generation to discover it once again.